In this video, I'd like to talk about why I prefer the manually operated fuel valves over the vacuum operated ones. And there are really two reasons. The first reason has to do with storing a motorcycle for an extended period of time. When I say extended, I mean anywhere between a couple of weeks, a month, to several months. And so there are different philosophies. Some folks like to drain the gas or leave the gas in the gas tank and drain the carburetors. The problem with that is, first of all, it's a lot of hassle, and then even when you drain the carburetors through the drain screws, it doesn't really void the entire system from gas. There's still gasoline trapped in the very fine passages within the carburetors, and it congeals there. It actually creates more of a problem than it solves. So my preferred method of dealing with storage is to leave the gas tank full. I stabilize the gas. Every couple of weeks, once the gas stabilizes and I'm storing the motorcycle, let's see if I can show you. So this bike has been sitting for about a week. And so what happens with gasoline is it begins to evaporate. And so because the carbs are vented and the gasoline is evaporating from the float bowls, and eventually it's going to kind of turn into a little bit of a gel. Of course, stabilizing the gasoline helps, but it's still best to keep the entire float bowl wet and jets wet. So what I do every couple of weeks is I will open the fuel valve like this. And you can see it's difficult for the camera to focus, but the fuel filter just filled, and that means that there's gas that has gone into the float bowls of the carburetors. And so the carbs are now wet, and so now at this point I turn the fuel off, and just repeat this every couple of weeks, and you should be able to store the bike and then be able to hopefully start it with no problem. I certainly have left this motorcycle sitting for several months and was able to start it right away. And so the second advantage of the manually operated fuel valve has to do with when if you ever run out of gas. Both the manually operated fuel valve and the vacuum operated fuel valve, they have reserve settings. When you flip this valve to reserve, gas is delivered to the carbs right away. With the vacuum operated fuel valve, the valve is not going to be on unless the engine is running, so you have to sit there cranking the motorcycle. Hopefully your battery is strong. There are other ways to get the gas into the float bowls, but you have to have some tools with you. You can pinch the vacuum line, stuff like that. But if you're not ready, it's going to take some time to fill those float bowls. But if you have a vacuum operated fuel valve, but with a manual valve, it's not an issue. All you got to do is flip to reserve, and you're on your way. There's of course, one disadvantage of this valve, and that is if you leave the valve on and you forget, and you leave it in this position, and let's say that your float valves are not sealing very well, and I have a couple of videos on float valves as well, but let's say that they're not sealing very well. Unfortunately, the carburetors on this motorcycle do not have overflow tubes. If the float bowls overflow, the gasoline doesn't end up on the ground and ends up in your airbox, and what's much worse is in your motor. So it can hydrolock, or it can leak down to the bottom end and on startup smoke your bearings. So you really have to make sure to turn your gas off. It's always a safe, good thing to do, even if your float valves are sealing well, to turn it off when you park the motorcycle.